So in Galatians, it talks about the fruits of the Spirit. It's a popular passage in Christianity in the West here. And it says the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, and faith. Meekness and temperance. Against such there is no law. So if we're saved by grace, and those who are justified by the law are fallen from grace, then it's a good chance that the fruits of the Spirit are not abundant in that particular experience. I think it might have been Jesus, but I'm not sure, who said that you will know them by their fruits. So, if we're to walk by faith and not by sight, which is another scripture, then the fruits that we should be knowing someone by are spiritual fruits. In other words, the good fruits are the unseen fruits. They have a way of being met in the Spirit. It's not about how good we can produce in the world, or how well we can be known, or how famous we can become. Those aren't the fruits that are really in the neighborhood of eternal fruits. They can be pleasant for a while, but they don't last. This is important to understand because if the ego gets a hold of the scripture that says, you will know them by their fruits, it's happy to jump in the judge seat and say, oh, those fruits look wrong. I'm right because I see the wrong fruits and I know what right fruits are. Ego is happy to do that. So it's really important to understand which fruits are the important fruits. Because if it's love, joy, and peace, and the rest of the spiritual fruits, we can see in that list in Galatians, it's in chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, we can see in that list that judgment isn't included in that. And really, discernment isn't included in that either, at least not directly. But what's being shared is a kind of discernment in that passage. It's giving us direct information on what to look for, and that way we can understand what it is when we meet it, that the spiritual fruits are manifesting, when the spiritual fruits are manifesting. So it isn't about being right, it's about meeting something in the unseen, And that's the beauty of it. If we can find that place in the inner experience that connects to those spiritual fruits, then we're onto something that's much bigger than what can be manifested in the physical realm. It isn't a journey of being right. I can't stress this enough, because that's one of the things that the ego will do if it's given an opportunity to hold truth. And I say this in kind of a way that obviously can't represent truth fully, because truth can't be contained or held in language. But anyway, if the ego gets a hold of the scriptures and uses them from the lower nature of consciousness, then it's always going to be a game of I'm right and that one over there is wrong. It's about that false self and its relationship to the rest of the world, that false self and others. And I'm not sharing this because it's important to give all of your attention to that. I'm just sharing this so that you can watch for it and notice that sometimes that is seeming to appear. And when it does, not to follow it, not to give all of your attention to it. Because that's when trouble shows up. When trouble shows up in the identity that, yes, I'm definitely right because I'm following these rules and these precepts and these guidelines that are written in the Holy Scriptures. You know, this is dangerous territory, because there are many who would judge by outward appearances, who would be in agreement that such things would be considered holy. But in fact, the holiness isn't something that can be seen with the physical eyes. Holiness is not something that can be held with the physical hands. It can't be carried with the physical body. It's something that springs up from within. It's not something that the ego could ever possibly hold. But when the ego evolves in its own kind of unwholesome way, it can begin to grasp for these holier appearances. And I've heard some call this the superego. And there are a lot of spiritual teachers who kind of come into this. They purify themselves a little bit through an increased inner awareness. But what happens is they allow that to go to their head, and the ego gets a hold of that and says, look what I've done. I've become much more pure. I'm higher. I'm holier. And this is where the holier than thou concept comes into being. At least for a while. It can't survive. But at least for a while, it has its appearance. But what happens in that, the one that goes through that directly can see from inner experience that the phase that came before that was still a dark phase, but the phase of that, it feels more ugly inside than when that simple ignorance was having its play. Both circumstances embody suffering, because they're both embodying ignorance. But the problem when this superego that wants to be a spiritual teacher too early comes into the picture, it's a mixture of perhaps a small degree of purification that's happened, and then that's given to the mind, and then it's mixed with arrogance. It's mixed with arrogance and pride. Pride is a deep satisfaction in one's historical achievements. And arrogance is really more like choosing to refuse a greater depth of purification or healing when those things are available. So it's a conscious choice to remain in that depth of darkness when one has been given the tools and the opportunity to see beyond enough to know what's good in that situation, what's right, what's fitting in that situation for spiritual growth. So, it really could be like a child, a newborn. It's said that they can't quite see. They don't have the ability to focus on the physical world. So it's kind of like that when the spiritual waking up happens. There has to be this kind of nurture that's given to that new inner seeing, in the same way that nurture and focus and attention is given on behalf of the newborn in order to learn how to use the physical eyes. But who can remember going through that process as an infant? When we look back, we didn't have language. We didn't have words to tell an inner story during that phase of our physical development. So I would venture to say that it would be a very rare occurrence if someone had the ability to recall that phase of human development. The spiritual vision, we do have the ability to see from the beginning of that process through its maturing. When one first wakes up in the spiritual domain and has the ability to be in the presence of spiritual fruits, it does take some development to recognize. If you notice in that list, these spiritual fruits are very close to positive emotions. Love, joy, peace. These kinds of feelings that we get, they're very positive, very pleasant in the emotional domain inside.